Hey guys, Andrew here with another episode of East Coast Tech. And on today's episode, let's find out how we can squeeze extra performance out of our CPUs with a little bit of overclocking. When looking at processors on the market today, two notable features stick out as selling points, which are the clock speed and core count. In the case of more advanced processors, thread count is also a factor. The clock speed is how fast a CPU can calculate things in a second. A processor with a clock speed of 3 GHz can compute 3 billion calculations in 1 second. For the core count, a processor can have multiple cores, each running different calculations simultaneously. Thread counts are a little tricky to explain right now, so perhaps I'll leave them for another video. But let's say we have a quad-core or 4-core processor with a clock speed of 3 GHz. Each of its cores ends up running the 3 billion calculations, but can effectively do 4 at a time, as opposed to a dual-core processor which could only do 2 things. Early CPU performance enthusiasts, understanding that they couldn't just go and add cores to their CPUs, realized that they could get a little more performance out of their processors by tweaking the one factor they could change: clock speed. This is where overclocking comes into play. In my PC, I have an Intel Core i7-7700K processor which has a base clock speed of 4.2 GHz. And under the right thermal conditions, it will automatically overclock itself to 4.5 GHz. This type of controlled overclocking is called turbo boost, which is a coined Intel term. AMD's version is precision boost and works very similar. But a true PC enthusiast wouldn't be satisfied with built-in safe overclocking. No, we want to push our CPUs to the limit for maximum performance, which will lead us to the BIOS. Intel processors with a K in their SKU and most of the new AMD Ryzen chips have unlocked multipliers, which means they're overclockable, with the caveat that with greater clock speeds comes greater thermals and instability, which should be mitigated prior to overclocking in the BIOS. On top of that, not all motherboards support overclocking, so please check yours beforehand. Within the BIOS on an overclockable motherboard, we have the BCLK frequency, which we can use to overclock our CPU. But our best bet is to start with the CPU core ratio. The core ratio times our BCLK frequency gives us our CPU clock speed in megahertz. For beginners, I would not recommend adjusting the BCLK frequency unless you are comfortable. I know my CPU can handle a core ratio of 48, so that's what I have it set to. You may have to perform a little trial and error depending on your processor and cooling solution. Now to test. There are a number of tools we can use to test stability, most notably is Ada64, which does cost money. But let's try a free alternative. CPU-Z is a free testing tool, or we could really bring the heat with Prime 95. Since we're not trying to cook our processor just yet, let's go with CPU-Z. It's also a good idea to open up Task Manager and a hardware monitoring tool, like Hardware Monitor. It's also a good idea to add any programs that could be eating up a significant portion of your CPU performance. So quit out of web browsers, music players, and games. With that out of the way, start up CPU-Z and pay close attention to your temperatures. If they spike up too high or too quickly, you may be headed for a system crash. But on the other hand, if they stabilize too quickly, you may still have some wiggle room. Try testing for an hour and see how you fare, going back into the BIOS and tweaking settings as needed until you find the right balance between clock speed and thermal output. Once you're satisfied and your system is rock hard stable at whatever core ratio you end up at, you're all done. Now, for the possible drawbacks. Overclocking can shorten the lifespan on your CPU. Personally, I don't think you would see the effects until long after you'd be looking to upgrade, but nonetheless, the caveat is there. Also, increasing clock speeds on your CPU can increase the total power it ends up consuming. So, be sure that your power supply is up for the task. Honestly though, that's about it. If you have an overclockable processor and a motherboard to match, try your hand at overclocking. It's a free benefit in performance, the gains of which we'll probably end up seeing in another video. Thanks for watching, guys. If you like this video, hit that like button. Get subscribed if you want to see more content from me. Again, this was Andrew with East Coast Tech, and I'll see you next time.